Hello and welcome. My name is Mark Horseman, Data Evangelist with DataVersity. We would like to thank you for joining the current installment of the monthly DataVersity webinar series, Real World Data Governance with Bob Seiner, sponsored by Informatica. Today, Bob's topic is enhancing metadata governance for better data quality. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. If you would like to chat with us or chat with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And just to note, the Zoom chat defaults to send to just the panelists, but you may absolutely switch that to network with everyone. For questions, we will be collecting them by the Q&A section. To find the chat and the Q&A panels, you'll find the icons for those features in the bottom middle of your screen. As always, we will send a follow-up email within a couple of business days containing links to the slides, a recording of the session, and any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me pass it over to our sponsor, David from Informatica, for a quick word. David, take it away, my friend.
Thank you, Mark, and hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be with you today. We're here to talk about something foundational to every data-driven organization. You can think of metadata as the DNA of your data. It's not just about what the data is, but what it means. It tells you where the data comes from, how it's been transformed, and who's responsible for it. Without strong metadata governance, your organization will inevitably face fragmented data, inconsistent definitions, and a critical lack of trust in your most valuable assets. Robust metadata governance is key to clarity. It's going to help you answer those essential questions like, what do we have? Where did it originate? What happened to it along the way? And who's accountable? Let's bring this to life with a few real-world examples. So if we think of a regulatory compliance use case, a financial institution can't meet regulations like BCBS 239 or GDPR without complete data lineage. With strong metadata governance, they can trace every critical data element to meet audits and compliance demands. It's not an option, it's a requirement. For business intelligence, imagine a global retailer using metadata to harmonize product data across different regions. This allows them to get consistent, reliable KPIs so executives can make smart strategic decisions with confidence. And for business process automation, a healthcare provider uses metadata governance to identify and eliminate redundant data sources. The result? Significant cost savings and better data stewardship across the enterprise. These aren't just technical exercises, they're strategic initiatives that directly support compliance, agility, and efficiency. Now let's zoom out a little bit and look at the bigger picture, what we call the data value chain. This is the entire life cycle of data for any organization in any vertical or any business process for that matter, from its creation to when it delivers business value. Every organization strives for data that's protected, that's easily accessible and meaningful. At every single stage of the journey, metadata acts as your system of intelligence. It documents where data came from, what's changed, and who has access to it. This is why embedded metadata governance is not just a nice to have, it's the critical nervous system for a healthy data value chain, enabling transparency and building trust from end to end. So how do organizations achieve this? By adopting a powerful centralized data management platform. And this is where Informatica comes in. The Intelligent Data Management Cloud, or IDMC, is the industry's most advanced solution. It's a unified metadata system of intelligence that provides comprehensive discovery and cataloging, will automatically scan and classify all of your data on-premise and in the cloud. End-to-end lineage. We give you crystal clear visualizations of your data flow so you always know its journey. Integrated governance. Our platform integrates metadata with data quality and governance policies, giving you a real-time health check on all of your data assets. And collaboration. We enable your data owners, your data stewards to work together seamlessly, fostering accountability. By leveraging a platform like Informatica IDMC, organizations can stop treating metadata and governance as a fragmented chore and start seeing it as a strategic, enterprise-wide capability. So a quick overview of why metadata governance is so critical, how it supports the data value chain, and how technology like Informatica empower organizations. I'm thrilled to introduce our featured speaker. As you heard earlier, Bob Seiner is a recognized thought leader and an expert of all things data governance. He'll take you into a deeper dive into practical techniques and proven frameworks that'll help you enhance your metadata governance to deliver high quality data across your organization. So Bob, let me stop sharing my screen and the floor is all yours. Thank you very much, Mark.
Awesome. What a great introduction for Bob as well. So, Bob, take it away.
I will take it away. Give me a second here to share. And let me know when you can see my screen.
Crystal clear, buddy.
Okay, very good. And you can hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your schedule to sit in on this webinar today. Um, I always I always mention at the beginning of the webinars about the incredible series of topics that we choose to talk about in these webinars. And in this webinar, it's really incredible that it's really touching on three of the subjects that really I like to talk about the most. One is data governance, one is metadata, and the other is the one that everybody's talking about, which is data quality. So we're going to talk about metadata governance. Thank you, Dave, for the introduction and to kind of warm up the crowd in terms of metadata governance. Um, I also wanted to let you know that this is the fifth from the last of the series in the real world data governance series. So through the end of the year, I hope that you'll join us for the rest of the year. Really looking forward to touching on the three subjects in this webinar. There's also, in a minute, I'll mention the three subjects that are going to be in next month's webinar as well. And looking forward to having you joining us throughout the rest of the year. So this is episode number 163. Mark, me and Dataversity, we have done 163 episodes of the Real World Data Governance series. And so again, I thank everybody for attending. I'm looking forward to kind of closing out with a bang. So again, I hope you'll join us for those webinars as we hit the rest of the year. Um, I always like to start out by just telling you a little bit of some of the things that I'm involved in. As you know about this webinar series on the third Thursday of the month. Next month, the three subjects I'm going to talk about are going to be data governance, basically AI governance, and data democratization. So we're going to talk about data and AI governance in this age of where everybody's trying to democratize their data, in the age of data democratization. And there's a lot of places you can register for that webinar. Uh, I always start out by talking about the books that I've written. There's the first two, which were written in 2014, 2023, Non-Invasive Data Governance and Non-Invasive Data Governance Strikes Again. And then the third book was the Non-Invasive Data Governance Unleashed book, which came out earlier this year. I also have a relationship with Dataversity in many ways, and I expect to keep that going for certain. I have a couple online learning plans, actually more. I have three online learning plans available through Dataversity. If you're interested in non-invasive data governance or to learn more about KIK consulting, there is the information. And as I always say, in my spare time, I am also faculty at Carnegie Mellon University here in my hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So what are the things that we're going to talk about today? So as Mark and David talked about, we're looking to enhance metadata governance for better data quality. And if you've seen me speak before, I oftentimes say that I always say that the data will not govern itself. But if we want to have good data, good metadata, that it can be used through incredible products like Claire that Dave talked about a couple minutes ago. That metadata requires governance. Somebody is responsible for defining that metadata, defining what metadata is going to be used by the organization. Somebody is responsible for producing that metadata or getting that metadata from where it needs to be gotten from. And then there's certainly people that are responsible for using that metadata. So and that governance, the metadata is not going to magically appear. We need to formalize stewardship, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Formalize stewardship for the definition, production, and use of metadata even before our tools can really take advantage of it. So I'm going to talk about the role of metadata governance in data quality. Then I'm going to share with you some techniques for improving metadata governance. Because again, like I said, and you'll probably hear me say again, the metadata is not going to govern itself. And then we'll talk about taking this thing called metadata governance and aligning it and metadata management with the things that you're trying to achieve in terms of data quality. And then the last subject before I kind of jump into some examples of some organizations that are governing their metadata well is to build the last topic is going to be to build a strong governance framework around your metadata within your organization. So without further ado, we will move forward and just want to start real quickly with some definitions that I share these often in the webinars and in presentations. And my definition of data governance is worded very strongly. The execution and enforcement of authority. Non-invasive doesn't mean passive. Non-invasive doesn't mean a do-nothing approach. At the end of the day, it's all about executing and enforcing authority over the data. And in a second, you'll see I'll just use that same definition for metadata, but somebody has to be responsible for it. And the execution and making certain that it happens, and the enforcement, again, making certain that it happens, the execution and enforcement of authority over data is necessary. And it's also necessary over metadata as well. With data stewardship, and I talk a lot about how everybody in the organization potentially would be a steward of data if we formalize the accountability for the relationship those people have with the data as definers, producers, and users of data. So those are my two definitions for data governance and stewardship. I refer to them as metadata. For metadata, basically it's data that's stored anywhere in your ecosystem or in your information ecosystem, or even on paper, or even in people's heads. It's the information about the data that's going to improve, not only the business and not only the technical, but now even more so the business with the tools that are being made available on the market improves the business understanding of the data and all those assets that are related to the data. And then metadata governance is basically the execution and enforcement of authority, same definition as for data governance, but over the management of the metadata. So making certain that the trains are running on time, we know what metadata we're collecting, we have a purpose for the metadata we're collecting, and we make certain that we can get it into the hands of the people that can best use that. And then just the third topic really was the data quality. And that is, to me at least, consistent delivery of data that's accurate, reliable, and fit for purpose. So basically, I want to start out with with these definitions just to kind of get us all on the same page to get started. The first topic that I had in my abstract that I wanted to talk about was the role of metadata in governance and data quality. But I also, as I started to look at it, so before we get started, I want to think of it also kind of in reverse, where what is the role of governance in metadata? So the role of metadata in governance and the role of governance in metadata. Mark, I think we're going to need to have another webinar around that, because I think that is also a really important topic, because as we say, the metadata, as I say, the metadata will not govern itself. It needs to have formalized accountability if we expect the metadata to be of any value to the organization. The other subjects around the role of metadata in governance and data quality is, I want to look at different types of roles for metadata in governance and quality. So we'll talk about metadata as the anchor to basically everything in your data ecosystem, information ecosystem of your organization. We'll talk about driving quality rules through your metadata, supporting stewardship, and then enabling policy enforcement in a way that it's going to be effective across the organization. So the first thing is, the first role for metadata is that it's really that anchor of governance within the organization. So as it says here, metadata basically it's there to basically provide all of the necessary context, as Dave talked about, to understand not only where the data came from, what the meaning is, where there's other data related to that data, how this data can be used within the organization. And so this context, again, this anchor for metadata, or for your governance and your quality initiatives, it enables your organization to recognize and formalize accountability for those people that I talked about earlier, the people of the organization who are defining, producing, and using data. So again, if they're going to understand, if they're going to make the best use of the data, either they're going to inherently need to know about the data and where it exists or that information is going to need to be provided to them some way, somehow. Metadata, so another role for metadata in governance and data quality is to use it to drive your data quality rules through your metadata. I can't see any other way that you're going to be able to actually, if you're going to get to the point where you're automating your data quality, that you're going to do it without using some type of structure, some type of managed information. And that managed information is going to be your metadata. So the metadata, basically, as it says here, allows the data quality rules and the expectations to be documented somewhere where somebody can get used to it, where it can also be leveraged then through automation. And then these rules that you're putting to your data to check whether the quality is good or to report on the quality of the data, they can be then applied consistently across the organization in all those places where potential data quality issues exist, and where the data is being created, where it's being transformed, where it's being used in the organization. So again, this is a very important role for metadata in governance, is for us to be able to, especially when we're looking at it, to focus on better data quality, is to make certain that we've got good metadata that we can use to automate the solutions, where we can use to let people know the information that they need in order to take best advantage of the data. So there's a lot of different aspects about visibility. Another role of metadata in governance is that it's there to help support the stewards. And I think Dave talked about that a little bit in his session when he was starting this session, is the metadata makes everybody's job easier. And I just mean everybody. I mean everybody who has a relationship to data. And that's basically everybody in the organization. So it makes their life easier, makes it easier for them to be able to identify that data that's critical to them, to assess the current quality. So it's greater visibility into the lineage and the relationships. With that, the stewards can take the action that they need and to improve quality, to improve the standards around the data. That they're really going to be the backbone of your data quality initiatives, is going to be the documentation, the information that's documented within those data standards. And then also the metadata is basically there to take these things that we're putting together, these policies, these directives, this information that's coming from above, that's telling people what they need to or how they can handle the data. Basically, the metadata is what can be used to link those policies directly to those assets that people are accessing as part of their job. So this connection, making that connection between the metadata and the policies and the data quality rules and the standards, we're not just documenting them for documentation's sake, but we can actually, through the metadata, start to actively enforce these types of policies and standards and guidelines and things, through the metadata of the organization. So it's really important to consider what the role of metadata is in governance and quality. And I know I went through some of those really quickly, but we only have so much time to spend, and hopefully you'll research some of these subjects moving forward as well. The next main topic that I want to talk about today is just to share with you some different techniques for improving the execution and enforcement of authority over the metadata within our organization. And the first one is to establish clear stewardship of the metadata. And you know what? Stewardship is, in fact, maybe if there's a new book that's going to be written by me, it's going to be all about how stewardship is the basis, is the basically taking a stewardship approach to governance. And if we're going to govern the metadata, we need to know who in the organization, we need to know where in the organization, we need to know what, we need to know everything about the metadata, including those specifics about the people in the organization that have the accountability for defining, producing, and using that metadata. We need to integrate metadata with the data quality rules. I'll talk about that a little bit here in a second. We're certainly going to want to leverage the metadata to automate quality checks wherever we can. We can't have people eyeballing reports or eyeballing databases. We need to be able to leverage the metadata that we're governing to automate the quality checks wherever we can, promoting metadata-driven collaboration, and then talk about, metadata as a living, breathing object, something that needs to be updated, it needs to be audited to make certain that it's accurate, because it's not really only about data quality, but it's about metadata quality as well. So the first technique I want to share with you about improving metadata governance has to do with establishing that clear stewardship of metadata. And so I don't typically suggest to organizations that they go out and they assign people to be responsible for defining the metadata, for producing the metadata, for using the metadata. The first thing I suggest, following the non-invasive approach, is to recognize where there are people in the organization who are already doing that. So recognize and then formalize the accountability for people that are defining the metadata, people that are producing the metadata. If you've attended my webinar series in the past, I've talked probably often, and I know Mark will get a chuckle out of this, is I talk about cheeseburger definitions. So a definition of a cheeseburger is a burger with cheese. It's not really going to be helpful to anybody. The definition of a patient account is it's an account for a patient. No, we need to make people in the organization more formally accountable for putting real business definitions to the data, so that when all this work that we're doing around the metadata management and the implementation of the catalogs, that when that metadata eventually makes it into the hands of somebody that can use it, that it's written in such a way that's going to be beneficial to them. So basically it says here also, when stewards understand that they play a role in maintaining accurate metadata, and yes, there are metadata stewards just like there's data stewards. They could be some of the same people. They don't always have to be the same people. Whether it's definitions or lineage or classification, those things that you're asking the stewards to get involved with, it actually creates a culture of ownership that directly impacts the quality and trustworthiness of data in the organization. I notice I'm spending a lot of time on some of these slides, so I'm going to need to speed up a little bit so we can take some Q&A at the end of the session as well. Another technique for improving metadata governance is taking that metadata that we're managing the definition, we're managing how it's being produced, we're managing how it's being used, and kind of integrating it with the data quality rules that we just talked about a couple minutes ago. So taking the metadata and linking the business rules and the quality controls directly to the metadata within your metadata framework. Here's a quick example, tying validation rules, the data or lineage rules to the data that will help people to understand the quality of the data and where along the way the quality of the data might have been a lesser quality along the way. So you can pinpoint exactly where your data quality problems are. So another technique here is to integrate the metadata management with the data quality rules. And we could almost spend a whole webinar just talking about how organizations go about doing that. As I said before, if you don't have good quality metadata that people trust, it's going to be very difficult for you to automate in a fairly good way the quality checks for the data. So use the tools that are available to you. Use Informatica, use the other tools, use the tools to automate, the profiling, use it to look again to view against valid values of data, or look for anomaly detection where there might be an influx of values around a certain type of data. Look for integrity checks. It makes sense to think that if your system knows what good data looks like, it's going to be because it's documented somewhere. It's not just in somebody's head. Well, it might be in somebody's head to start, but it needs to be documented. So when your system knows what data is good and what data is not, and that means that we need to make the effort to define what is good data. I always say that if we're going to do data quality checks on data, we need to start by defining what good data looks like. And if the idea is then to use that metadata to automate your quality checks, which is really ideal in most environments, you're going to be better off. Your systems, your metadata are going to know what the good data looks like. Another technique for improving metadata governance, because that's really what this is all about, is to promote the things that you're doing, enable the transparency, knowledge sharing, make metadata visible across the departments. People think of metadata, and the first thing that they think about is that it's a technical resource until it's explained to them that it's going to help them to do all the things that they're probably presently having challenges with. So again, another technique for improving metadata governance is to pull the covers off of metadata and make it more visible across departments in your organization. And you can do that by developing a business glossary or data dictionary, storing it within your data catalog, using it to get people across the organization to speak the same language, reduce misunderstandings in the data, even highlight duplicate efforts that often end up leading to poor quality data. Another technique that I have and I think this is the last one in this part of the webinar, for improving metadata governance, is to consider your metadata to be a living asset in your organization. We don't just define a cheeseburger as a burger with cheese once. We need to go back and look and see, is that still the definition that we want to use? Has business changed? Has the way we operate as a business changed? Has the metadata changed? We don't want to work with our data dictionaries from the 1980s or even the year 2000s. I'm dating myself a little bit here, but treat your metadata as a living asset. And that technique that I'm talking about here is to make certain, I wouldn't say continuously update, but I would say on a regular basis, you want to update and audit your metadata just to make certain that it's accurate. So again, if we're looking at ways to be able to improve how we're governing our metadata, we need to make certain it's not a one-shot deal and that we're going to go back and review that metadata and make certain that it's accurate or that values haven't been added or changed. It'll make all the difference in your data quality rules if values change and it's not reflected in the metadata that talks about that, the metadata that talks about those critical data elements. All right, so the next subject I want to go through, and I think that we're moving at a good pace now. So aligning the metadata management with the data quality goals. So again, now we've talked about metadata management. We've talked about the importance of getting the people that in the organization that are defining, producing, and using the metadata as well as the data, giving them some more formalized accountability for the action they're taking. Let's talk about aligning that metadata management with the things that we're looking at here with the data quality goals of the organization. And the ways that we're going to do that is to first, one way is to clarify the data expectations using your metadata. Another way is to connect business glossaries, since it seems like every organization I'm talking to is in the middle of an effort or is getting ready to start an effort focused on business glossaries, but using those business glossaries and data dictionaries, some of the most basic metadata that you have in your organization, use it, connecting that to the quality rules in your organization, facilitating root cause analysis, prioritizing quality improvements, and then monitoring quality through metadata-driven metrics. Let's go through each of these real quick. And the first way that I talk about for aligning metadata management with data quality tools is to clarify, to provide what expectations you have for your data through your metadata. So metadata, it's the perfect time for you to document the expected formats for the data, the ranges, the business definitions, even the valid values and things that I just talked about before. And the fact is that if you try to do that for all the data elements in your organization, you'll never be successful. But if you can focus on those most critical data elements or CDEs, that's a good way to start clarifying what your expectations are. If you've defined your quality rules for specific critical data elements and you can go and start to automate those and start to use those, you can help start to define or clarify your data expectations through metadata for other critical data elements in your organization. So this clarity ensures that basically everybody that's working from cradle to grave with the data is working with the same data quality standards and the same data quality guidelines within the organization. Another way to align metadata management with the data quality goals is to take these business glossaries, take the data dictionaries, and as I say often, they're often considered to be some of the most basic metadata. When people started talking about metadata, it seemed as though the data dictionaries and now the business glossaries were such a big focus for organizations. Well, now that we've spent this time defining these things, defining what the data means, defining the data quality rules, we need to take advantage of those. So if there's a way for us to be able to link the information that we have now defined into our glossaries with the data quality actions that we're taking, it's going to be a better way to ensure consistent quality of data, consistent understanding and execution of quality data within your organization. Another way to align metadata management with your quality goals is to use the metadata to facilitate root cause analysis. So as issues come up with data, and you know that they happen fairly regularly, especially if your organization is going through transformation, especially if your organizations are now starting to think about AI and starting to take a closer look at that data that's going to feed your AI models, you know that you're going to be finding quality issues. And when those issues arise, using the metadata to kind of trace back to where the source of the problem is, if it was a system or a process or somebody along the way who was changing a value incorrectly or some problem. But certainly another way to align metadata with data quality is to facilitate root cause analysis. Use it to track your issues. Use it, even the tracking of the issues itself and the tracking of the stewards and what data they're related to. Again, my definition of data governance was the execution and enforcement of authority over to the data and the data related assets. You may refer to metadata as a related asset. Certainly the stewards are related assets. Certainly issues that are being tracked are related issues as well, or related assets. All of that information can be stored as and can be used to benefit your organization. So use your metadata management to facilitate root cause analysis when it comes to improving your data quality and your data quality goals. Another way to align metadata management with quality is to monitor data quality, monitor the data quality through metrics that you can now get from the metadata that we've talked about governing. So by associating the metrics with the specific pieces of data and the reports and the things that people are looking at, the metadata enables kind of that meaningful tracking of quality over time. In many organizations, they want to be able to demonstrate the progress and keep stakeholders informed using the metadata, using the results of those checks, those automated checks around data quality are going to be really helpful to your organization as well. And again, it's another way to align metadata management with quality goals. And so another way is to prioritize quality improvements by using your metadata. So you can use the metadata. There's actually a lot more metadata than the metadata that I've been basically talking about here. But the metadata can actually reveal to you what data is being accessed most often, who's accessing that data. Again, we think about metadata in terms of glossaries or dictionaries. But metadata, data about data, if that's the definition that you use, can be anywhere. It doesn't really become useful to anybody until you've recorded it and put it somewhere. So now once you have that metadata, you can look at it and say, what data are people using most often? What data is being used most often in reports? What data is going to pose the most risk to the organization? So you can use your metadata to prioritize quality improvements across your organization as well. So the last topic I want to talk about before I dive into like a handful of examples of how organizations have governed their metadata with success is to talk about governance frameworks. And so if you've seen my webinar series in the past, I always talk about frameworks as being a way to organize your thoughts about something. And so when we talk about governance frameworks, it doesn't include all the tools and everything together. It just really includes the people that are associated with the metadata. It's the metadata itself. It's the roles associated with it. It's the processes. It's the communications. All of those different ways for you to kind of put your thoughts together around what we need to do to govern our metadata. So when we talk about building a strong metadata governance framework, the first thing I want to talk about is kind of going back to that accountability and ownership aspect of establishing clear ownership and accountability, integrating all this metadata governance we're talking about with the existing programs that you have in your organization. And the biggest thing here is the embedding of metadata governance into business processes. When I talk about non-invasive data governance, I talk about embedding metadata into the things that people do, applying governance to existing process rather than redefining all of the processes of your organization. And then I'm going to talk about creating policies around metadata creation, usage, and maintenance. And is that a good thing for your organization? Do we need policies around metadata in order for them to stick? So the first topic, the first way to build a strong metadata governance framework is to establish that clear ownership and accountability. Recognize who in the organization, and notice again, I'm using the word recognize people that already exist. If you can do that, instead of assigning people new work, because I don't know about you, when I get assigned something brand new, when I get assigned something, it feels brand new. And it feels like, okay, this is now something that's my responsibility that I did not have responsibility for before. Let's look for the people that are already defining what your databases are looking like, are going to look like. Let's recognize them. Let's get them to play a role in defining the data, putting better definition to the data. If they don't know the definition, let's work with them to help get the right definition for that data. So we're not providing people cheeseburger definitions that will be of no help to them at all. So recognizing the roles of the people that will have responsibility for stewardship really does one thing. It ensures that someone in the organization is responsible now for its accuracy, consistency, and relevance. So the idea of recognizing people for things that they're already doing and getting people to step up and to be accountable. I think that's it's a real non-invasive approach, is to again recognize those people who are already related to doing this work or who are already doing this work and to formalize how they do that. So again, for the betterment of the metadata and the betterment of the organization as a whole. Integrating metadata. So metadata governance, I don't suggest that organizations now should run out and start their metadata governance programs. They don't need to be standalone efforts, but typically I suggest that they would be that your governance of your metadata needs to just be an extension of your broader data governance efforts. So aligning the two, making certain that data governance and the data about the data that's going to help people to make better use of that data, governing that data as well, is going to is going to be a big benefit to the organization. And it's also going to not make people think that now we need to create a brand new program called metadata governance. Oh, we haven't thought of that before. Well, I'm telling you right now that the metadata that you have within your organization, it is already being governed. It is being governed informally, most likely. And all I'm talking about with non-invasive data governance is let's put some formality to who does what with the metadata in the organization. So we want to make certain that we're not defining data governance or metadata governance as a standalone initiative. It is part of data governance. It's part of information governance. It's just a part of governance, AI governance as well in general. I always talk about this in terms of being non-invasive and taking your metadata governance and kind of embedding it in the things that people already do. And it's been my experience that governance works the best when it just becomes part of people's everyday jobs. Just like when you're in examples of onboarding a new system or launching an analytics initiative, just make it part of those initiatives. If you're defining new data, put some rigor around how that data is being defined. If you're launching new initiatives, make certain that you have some sense of governance around those initiatives, but build it into what people do. Embedding governance into what people do it feels less like it's encroaching on their time, and it ensures sustainability and minimizes disruption across the organization. And so building another way to enhance metadata governance, to build a strong metadata governance framework, is to create policy around metadata. And I haven't seen a lot of organizations at this point that have a lot of policy around their metadata, but it is something that we need to consider. So when we think about a framework for our metadata with our organization, about how it's being captured, who can modify it, how it's being kept current, as I talked about before, having policy in place around metadata, the one thing that it will do is it will maintain that if the policy is being followed, the long-term value and the reliability of that metadata also across the organization. All right, so I'm going to spend about 5 more minutes, if I could, with you, and then turn it over to Mark to see if we have some questions for today. I want to run through a handful of examples of different organizations that have excelled in metadata governance and some of the outcomes that they've received from focusing on metadata governance. And so the first one is I want to talk about a longtime former client of mine, a global financial services organization. They were focusing a lot of their work on data quality. So they realized very early on that that having standardized metadata across the organization was going to help them to lead to more consistent definitions, consistent quality checks. They focused on this. They actually spent a significant amount of time and effort on this. And the outcome from implementing metadata standards across the organization, again, they did this somewhat incrementally, was that it led to fewer discrepancies in reports. It led to a stronger foundation for regulatory compliance. And I think if you look for use cases in the financial services organizations, you'll find that a lot of them are focusing on data quality checks, and there's a lot of it written into their quality checks that has to do with metadata. And they're looking for these types of outcomes around data quality and data quality consistency. Um, Another organization, a healthcare provider that I spent many years working for years ago, lineage to them was what was most important. So they developed a system, or we developed a system, to automatically trace the lineage and enable people to identify where along the way with the data that there were quality issues, or where the quality issues were taking place, and getting them. And so because the first thing that needed to be done during the root cause analysis was to identify that where there are quality issues, where the quality issues are initiating within the organization. And when they did this approach reduced the amount of time that it took to resolve data integrity issues and challenges within the organization. Another example is a large retailer used automation to build pipelines that captured and updated metadata in real time. So again, the more you can automate process, the more you can have your data governance and your metadata management tool actually be able to read from the metadata within the tools in your environment, and they can recognize when things change and when the metadata in the catalog needs to be updated. The chances of your metadata quality being higher is going to be huge, because as things change in your environment, there's going to be an automated way for you to get that metadata into your data catalog or whatever metadata repository your tool you're using. So this retailer built an automated pipeline to capture the metadata in real time. What it did was it decreased the pressure on people to do things manually within the organization. It enabled them to be able to create quality dashboards that track and report the data across the different systems of the organization. Again, they were using metadata and metadata governance to improve the quality of the data in the organization. Another example is of an organization that embed metadata governance in their stewardship workflows. And there's a lot of research organizations that are out there right now that are looking to help people in the organization validate how they're using the data, validate the quality rules, trust the data in order to do as good a job as they can with the research that they are doing. this organization basically took the metadata and embedded it into the stewardship practices. And by doing this, it was really a proactive approach that reduced the number of data quality issues within the organization. Again, another example of an organization taking advantage of the metadata that they have, but embedding it into stewardship workflows as their way of being able to implement metadata governance. Another organization, a government agency, integrated their use of metadata repositories. It's interesting that as I put that there, the fact is that they just had many metadata repositories, but they also then did an inventory of what resources they have available to them, and with the idea of being able to use those to establish the data quality tools and get the feedback that they need around the quality of the data. And this connection improved responsiveness to quality issues across or governance across the organization. So I know I went very quickly through a whole bunch of these things as typically do, and I hope I addressed some of your thoughts about enhancing metadata governance for better data quality. I talked about the role of metadata in governance and quality. I also talked about the flip side of that, which is the role of governance in metadata as well. And I think that's really important. As I said at the beginning, the metadata is not going to govern itself. We shared some techniques for improving metadata governance. We talked about aligning metadata management, building a strong governance framework, and then I shared with you some examples. And with that, Mark, I'm going to turn it back to you to see if we have any questions today.
We have a bunch of really wonderful questions for both you and David here. And so we'll start right at the top. The biggest challenge I have encountered in my experience, documentation is not a priority. So how do we shift the mindset in order to support metadata initiatives?
David, I don't know how we want to do this. If you want to take one and I take one, or I'll be happy to answer that one first. Um,
Sure,
just
sure.
just think of it this way. You can't, your organization cannot manage your people without data about your people. Your organization cannot manage your facilities and your locations and your customers without information about those things. Think about trying to manage your data without information about your data. So I understand that it's a low priority. It's been a low priority for a lot of organizations. But the fact is that we need to make it clear that if we're going to manage this stuff and we're going to be efficient and we're going to be effective and we're going to govern risk for AI or whatever we're doing moving forward, we're going to need to document these things. So it's not you, it's them. I think making the message clear to them that we're not going to be successful across the board in the organization without having the documentation is a very strong message to send.
Yeah, and I would add that you need to have sponsorship within your organization, and that means providing some training and support so that you can create a culture of data accountability where this stuff becomes important and they start to see the wins and the results because of it.
Yeah, it's you got to change that mindset. It's data governance is a lot about changing mindset right now, and that's certainly around documentation. That's a big hurdle to get over because, as I said, the metadata won't govern itself.
And this is a wonderful segue into our next question here. This is a three-part question. I'm only going to ask the first part here so we can get to a couple other questioners. At what stage in a data governance implementation should an organization start working on metadata governance? Feel like that's a whole webinar, Bob.
Yeah, it is. I'll let David answer that one first.
Well, I think
I'll
it's
give you the easy ones, David.
yeah, it's the topic of today's presentation, but I think the answer is immediately, right? It's critical, right? That's what we've been talking about for the last 30, 35 minutes, and Bob's articulated so well. So it has to happen up front. There's no doubt.
Well, it has to happen up front, but it had the fact is that you probably already have metadata in your organization. You may have dictionaries somewhere. You certainly have in your DB2 or Oracle or Teradata, or I'm naming all these old databases, but you have in those catalog tools, you have metadata that's just buried. It's not being used by anybody. So I would say, David, I agree with what you said, but I would say you've already started. You just need to recognize where you started.
I like that. And yeah, mentioning all these old tools. How, how do you get buy-in? This is another $1 million question here. How do you get buy-in for employees who should care about their data responsibilities, but don't see what's in it for them or think it's too much work?
How long have they been there? I mean, that's probably one of the problems, right? Is that they've been there for a long time and they've been allowed to think that way. Times are changing, Mark. Times are changing big time in businesses. The way that they're thinking about doing business, the information that they have, and the information that they use. I say if you have employees, and many organizations probably still have many of those types of employees. The truth is, when we talk about data literacy, data fluency, change management types of training, you need to start providing that to those people so that they can get away from having that mindset that, I don't have time for this. You know what? You do because you're spending a lot of your time other places doing things that you could be doing things that would be more effective for you and for the organization.
David, are you on the Bob Dylan train here too? The times they are a changing?
100%. And on the tip of my tongue, and then Bob got to it, was data literacy in general. As times change, the most forward-looking organizations are, bringing up that level of data literacy across the organization. That includes metadata, metadata governance, and data governance. All this stuff is so critical as you align it with your business objectives, and then you start to see the results.
Yeah, I've always gotten good engagement from folks when I actually show them what's in it for them, and it's like, hey, look, I'm here to help. I'm not here to throw work at you. Um,
Right. And they got to see themselves. I mean, otherwise, I hate to say this, it needs to be a little bit more invasive. It needs to be somebody in the organization saying, like, either get with the program or we're going to find somebody who will get with the program. I hate to be that brash, but I mean, it's true in this day and age with data and information. It's we can't have the old mindset. I'm part of that old mindset. I'm part of the times when that was the main thinking within an organization, and it's got to change.
yeah, you referenced Bob Dylan, and I think when that came out, it was on an 8-track for you, wasn't it? Sorry,
Oh
Bob.
no.
Jeez.
Can you share some practical metrics that is helpful to show metadata governance values to management? 5 upvotes on this question. That was a doozy. I think that's a whole webinar too.
Say that question again, Mark. I'm sorry.
Can you share some practical metrics that is helpful to show metadata governance value to management?
I'll let David take that one first.
Yeah, the first one, and where I would say I see the most impact, and it goes back to, a little bit of the conversation on sometimes how do you evaluate or how do you judge, but I'm going to go right into data quality. If we can apply classifications and identify critical data elements at the metadata level, and then systematically, or even with AI tooling, apply data quality rules and see the results and see those dashboards and see uh, the quality of the data improve and then the results within the business operations, then people are going to notice. But I started off in data quality 30 years ago, and oftentimes we could get people across their organizations, just like data and metadata, to say, we believe we have data quality issues, but they couldn't quantify it. They can't put anything behind it. So if you can track it and you can put the metrics and you can use the metadata to help surface those issues and then fix those issues and provide value to the business, then people are going to start to notice.
Yeah,
That
and
is
I
an
think I
excellent
think
example
I
too.
think metrics they're being able, in the olden days, I hate to talk about the olden days here, Mark. In the olden days, people used to say what percentage of their data warehouse was documented. Um, Now it could
Yeah.
be what's the percentage of our AI models, the data in our AI models that are being documented. What percentage of that metadata has actually gone through any validation or any, I won't need to say necessarily certification, but maybe even certification, so that people have validated that it's correct, that it's right. Those are all metrics that you can use, and you can even start small. You can even start, I know that many organizations have started with system inventories, how many systems do we have in our system inventory? How many of those do we have data dictionaries for? How many of those are deemed critical by the organization? How many of them have highly confidential data? You're right, Mark. It's another webinar for another day, but all of those things are measurable.
Yeah, and it's one of those things like just because you can measure something, well, that's nice, but how are you going to action it? And one of the trains that I always get on, Bob, and I'm sure you've heard me get on my soapbox about this, is what are you naming these metrics? Like, it, like, what are you calling this value, such that people can have an intrinsic understanding? This is why I really like David's example, because data quality is such a clean example of good metadata management metrics and definitions. Like, it just makes sense. People have like an intrinsic feel about what quality means. Like that's something that's going to communicate well.
Yep. I've never noticed all the little applause and hearts and everything going up on the right hand side of our
Yeah,
webinar before. Is
this
that new?
this is a newer Zoom feature that that our audience is enjoying. And yeah, it's neat. Yeah. Um, we've got a few more questions in here. I'm trying to find, like, they're all great, but oh, this one's punchy. I like it. How much metadata is sufficient? How much is excessive?
That's a great question.
Go for it
I would,
first. If you want.
yeah, I would say, what do you consider sufficient? So I think you need to, obviously, we talked a little about critical key data elements. You need to cover those. It needs to support your governance objectives, right? And it has to enrich kind of the context of what you're trying to do. So that's going to facilitate automation, raise awareness, raise that data literacy. The second half talks about what's excessive. And I think this goes back to some of the questions that were raised around we don't want to do documentation, and this is boring. It's not my job. Why should I care? So I think that if you're doing things not in the right way, that could seem like there's a metadata overload because you have maybe low value elements, but it's all important. So you want to automate that as much as possible, and you're not going to get that feeling of excessive metadata, right? So take care of the things that are key, that are aligned to your objectives, and the rest will take care of itself. Metadata about the metadata about the data.
And so the way I would typically gauge that would be, are you answering the questions that people in the organization have? And if you're not, I mean, then the question is why are you, I mean, you might want to be managing it for technical reasons as well. But if you're
Love
not
that.
answering the questions that people in the organization have, and then that also then gives you the opportunity to create a process for when people have questions about metadata that you don't have, that they can submit to that. Wow, look at all those. Everybody's like, give
That
them
was
a process to be able to go and enter all of the, enter what metadata they need, or maybe they're going to be asking questions about metadata that exists that they don't know about exists.
right. I love it.
Bob, this question is like right up your alley. I'm not going to ask the second part. Oh, no, I'll ask it anyway, and you can
Oh,
go for this. So, what are the basic questions to ask to identify their word, a steward? Do you have any previous recording with detailed instructions or a framework to easily establish ownership and stewardship?
well, first of all, yes, this is a great question for you, Mark. Very good question for me. Um, I always say that we need to recognize who the stewards are. So we need to know who's defining the data. We need to know who's producing the data. We need to know who's using the data. We don't need to go tag each of them on the shoulder and say, hey, you're now a data steward. Start doing data stuff. Start doing steward stuff. So, trying to, everybody's got a day job, and being a steward is not, in a lot of organizations, is not written into their job description. So if they're going to be, so if they are, and this is the way I always talk about it, if a person has a relationship to the data, if they either define the data or produce the data or use the data or two of the three or three of the three, and they're being held accountable. That's the key part. They're being held accountable for that. then they're a steward. They're taking, basically, you look up the word stewardship or steward in the dictionary, and the definition is it is somebody who takes care of something for somebody else. So if they are defining, producing, and using data and they're being held accountable for it, meaning they're taking care of it for the organization, they're a steward, they can't really opt into or opt out of that. It's just recognizing instead of assigning them to be a steward and then helping them to do the best job that they can. So I don't like the term ownership. I like different levels of stewardship. I like domain stewardship for subject areas, but ownership to me implies exactly the opposite, like a 180 degrees turn from stewardship. Stewardship is somebody who's taking care of something for somebody else. Ownership is it's my data. I can do with it what I want. That's why you almost never see me use the word own. I don't
David, I'm going to give you the last word here, buddy, and then that's all we have time for. So, David, your parting thoughts?
My parting thoughts, I think that we also oftentimes hear about data ownership, and I love the way, Bob, that you articulated that. And I could picture in my mind, it's ownership, it's mine. And I can, think of lots of different jobs I've had around data in the past where that's a problem, right? You can't get access to it. They protect it for good or bad, right? So you don't have access to the metadata, you don't have access to the data, you don't have access to those data products, and it's not open to the organization to interpret. So I love the way that you frame that. It's been an awesome session.
It's been great having you. I appreciate you. I appreciate Informatica for sponsoring today.
Oh, happy to do it.
Awesome. And that's all we have time for. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, chat, for being so electric and asking so many questions. There was so much going on. Thank you for all of the reactions on the side of the window. That's always so much fun. And everybody have a wonderful rest of your day. And thanks again to Bob and David.
Thank you.
Thank you.